My name is Kelly Young. I work at the Gilroy Library, which is part of the Santa Clara County Library District. And today we have with us the authors of, let's see if I can get this to show, Quit Like a Millionaire. There we go. And it is Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung. Hello.
Hi.
And we're going to do a Q&A, and the audience is welcome to put questions into the Q&A. And then as we go through our interview, we'll be able to ask some of your questions or ask them at the end, depending on the amount of time that we have. So thank you everyone for joining us, and welcome again. And let's kind of get started with something easy. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how all this started.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kristy, and this is my husband, Bryce. So we used to live in one of the most expensive cities in Canada. It was Toronto. And so what we were doing was kind of going along the regular path, having a job, like 9-to-5 job. Well, actually it was like way longer than 9-to-5 because I actually had very long hours, but it was just having the job, trying to buy a house, and then working until you're retired at 65 and just being like everyone else. The problem was the housing prices just kept getting higher and higher and more expensive. And it doesn't matter how much money we were saving. It just was, the goalpost just kept moving, and I didn't feel like we were getting ahead at all. And on top of that, my job was getting more and more stressful over time. So I worked as a computer engineer. And one of the things that happened in the IT industry was that a lot of our jobs was being outsourced to India. So I couldn't really compete with engineers willing to work for $5 an hour living in Mumbai. So on top of trying to save money to buy a house with all the crazy housing prices that were over $1 million, I was also trying not to get fired from my job. And I was also working 60 to 80-hour weeks. And it got so bad to the point where one of my coworkers, who had been working 14-hour days for the last 3 years, not taking any vacation days, one day he actually collapsed at his desk and he almost died from overwork, from stress. So at that point, that was a wake-up call for me. I realized that I could continue along this path and either get laid off and outsourced, or have a heart attack at my desk and die, and trying to buy a house that I was never going to be able to afford, or I could try something drastically different and try to get out of this whole lifestyle that wasn't working for me. And that is around the time that we discovered financial independence. And then at that point, I realized, hey, if we don't take all our savings and buy a house, and instead we use it to build a balanced, diversified portfolio, then the portfolio would actually pay us a passive income that would cover all our expenses, and then we never have to work again. So that was a lot more enticing than actually working or getting laid off. So at that point, we decided to completely switch gears. Instead of trying to buy the house, we decided to actually pursue financial independence. And as a result, from the time that we started working to the point where we became financially independent and retired, that took about 8.5 years. And since then, we've been traveling the world for the last 6 years until the pandemic hit and we had to come back and help family. So as a result, we actually became one of the youngest retirees in Canada. And then we've been traveling the world for the last 6 years.
Wow, that's a whirlwind right there.
Yeah, there's something there.
So one of the things that I ask as someone who I'm married, has someone else to consider, maybe when you started this journey, one of you had the idea and maybe had to get both of you on the same page because, you know, everyone is different. And so I wondered, like, how did you work through that process?
Well, so I was the one that kind of first pitched the idea of financial independence, and I was quite lucky. Okay, lucky is not the right word, but I had a very, let's say, receptive audience to the idea of retiring in your 30s because she hated her job, right? So when somebody hates their job, if you offer a solution for literally anything else, it usually goes pretty quickly. It was easy for us, but I get that there is a phenomenon of people who are, for example, if it went the other way around, where she hated her job and she wanted to pitch this whole financial independence thing to me, and I, for example, liked my job at the time I did, and so how does that work? So this is actually quite common. Ours, let's do financial independence. Okay, that's actually quite rare. one person is usually like really gung-ho about this financial independence, and then the other person is either meh or actively resisting it, because to people who are not as initiated into the whole idea of FIRE, they think that financial independence means scrimping and saving for decades, foregoing vacations, foregoing stuff that makes them happy, in order to save up money towards this eventual retirement to leave a job that the other person hates but you love, right? So that's not a great. It's not a good sell. It's not a good sell. It's not a good sell. And I get that. What I like to tell people is that first of all, it's not about deprivation. When we were working and we were saving money, we were not like, sitting at home eating mac and cheese and like never going anywhere. We still went out to bars. We still went on vacations. We spent like $5,000-$6,000 on. We took at least 2 trips every year, usually overseas and that kind of stuff. It's more about prioritizing what you spend your money on. So it's like, not like pick 1 or 2 things that make both of you really happy. Make sure you spend money on that, but don't waste money on things that neither of you care about. So an example of this is like, banking fees. Nobody likes banking fees, right? I mean, like nobody says, yay. It's like, I will not give up my high fees, like checking account. No, it's like, that's one of those things that you can cut that actually makes you happier after you cut it, because it feels like you're winning and this kind of stuff. So that's one of the things which you talk about in the book about how to it's not about cutting your expenses. It's about making your spending more efficient and making sure that you're actually getting the bang for your buck that you think you're getting, right? Right. A lot of people just money sprays everywhere and they don't know. And at the end of the month, they go, where did it all go? And then they realize they spent it on things that didn't make them happy, like parking tickets and takeout boxes, right? Like that's not a good, like you can you can do something with that. And the second thing is we try to, on our blog and in the book, depict a life of retirement that's not just quitting your job. It's like we like to say, it's not, you can't just retire from something. You have to retire to something else, like to something like that's a better vision of what your life is. And we can, and I know we're going to talk more about that in a bit, but our traveling lifestyle is quite appealing to a lot of people. Like we have been living nomadically basically ever since 2015, up until the pandemic, of course, in which we would every month we would switch countries, switch cities. We would just hop from Airbnb to Airbnb, and our life seems really glamorous and fun. And the reason why that's true is because it is. But that's what we also try to tell people. This could be you if that's what you want, or it could be something completely different. That's really up to you.
I think there's one of the very tiny upsides to the pandemic is that people are more open to working from home. And as a result of that, that's actually opened up more opportunities to people that they didn't expect to have before. Like if a couple of our friends who are graphic designers, they never thought that they would be able to work from home. But now that they've been able to do that, they're considering going freelance and becoming more nomadic, because once you start traveling, you realize that staying in North America is very expensive.
California specifically.
Especially California.
Your cost of living is nuts. And the thing is, a lot of people from California, if you grew up there and you spent a lot of time there, you just think that's what things cost. But it's not normal to pay $25 for a burrito. That's not like, that's kind of like, no, nobody else pays that amount of money.
Maybe in pesos in Mexico.
Maybe 25
pesos. Yeah.
Maybe 25
more
pesos.
Like it.
Yeah. But like the cost of living, the earning power in California is very, very high, but the cost of living is also really, really high. And that's what causes people to think that they're just not getting ahead. When you add travel into the mix, you realize that you can like earn your money in one place and then spend it in a much lower cost of living locale. And for us, that was like Thailand or Vietnam or the Philippines. But even if you want to stay in America, it can be in another state that's not California, that you would have a very similar cost of living and a quality of life, but is not nearly as expensive. So I think the original answer was original question about
how do you get your spouse on board?
Yeah. Okay, so we kind of went off on a tangent there.
So travel.
So let's go back
Sell
to
them
that.
on travel.
Let's go back to that. So there's this. So the phenomenon is one person's really enthusiastic, the other person is very reluctant. And what I'd like to do is, and so what we do is we help our couples kind of get through that by saying, okay, if one person doesn't require the other person to retire, you can just retire on your own, figure out your expenses, figure out your lifestyle, and save up just your income so that you can retire, and the other person can do whatever they want. And then what invariably happens is after a few months of the other spouse saying, I really love my job, but then seeing the retired person wake up at like 11 a.m. and then just lays about the house and then like play video games all day.
Yeah. This is what we like to call aggressive relaxation.
Yeah, they come around real quick after that. They're like, wait a minute, this is BS. Why do I have to put up with all this crap? And you get to play Animal Planet or Animal Crossing for like 8 hours a day. I'm literally describing a friend of ours that's going through this process
doing this right now.
It's aggressive.
Multiple friends have gone through.
It works every time.
So you talked about living a nomadic lifestyle, but in the book, you talk about how family pressure and cultural values made that kind of a challenge. So can you discuss kind of how your decision to not buy a home was a challenge?
Oh, absolutely. So when we became millionaires and retired, and I told my mother, her reaction was, so you don't even have a house. Like, what's that worth? It's a big deal. So it did not go over well telling my parents about financial independence, especially since I come from a background where like my dad, when he was in China before he immigrated to Canada, he was at one point starving and in a labor camp. So someone who has gone through that and then coming to Canada and then being able to find a job and then make a better life, and then you're going to tell them that you're going to give up your job to retire early, like that's just unheard of. You're getting disowned at that point. So I've had a lot of fights with my parents about the financial independence part and the living nomadically and all that stuff. What ended up happening, very interestingly, is as a result of the pandemic, I've had to come home and spend more time with my parents and also help them with their health issues. And what both of us realized is that your relationship improves significantly when you use money to buy your time back. So my parents didn't quite understand that. Like they thought that I was just running away. Like, are you just shirking your responsibilities and just running away and acting like a child? But I actually showed them from coming back during the pandemic and not having to work and helping them because my mom was actually hospitalized recently and it was a very serious health issue. And also Bryce also had a very serious issue with his dad. And we were able to drop everything and just be there, like cleaning the house for them, cooking for them, helping them with medical appointments at the drop of a hat. And we were able to spend so much precious time with them because we didn't even know if they were going to survive. Like that's how bad it was. And then my parents finally came around and said, okay, I'm glad you did this financial independence thing because you might have gotten laid off during the pandemic. It's a very high likely chance. And they are realizing that it's not about shirking responsibility. It's about spending time with your loved ones. And the time that you got was the money that we paid for that with this with the portfolio. The portfolio covers our expenses so that we don't have to work, so that we can help them as much as we can. And that is that's better than anything you could ever buy, anything material that you could ever buy with money. So our relationship has gone a lot better. And my mom's health, numerous health issues. We've gone through them one by one and her health has improved significantly. So I think that is the real value of financial independence. And definitely there was a lot of culture shock with my parents not understanding what I was doing, a lot of fighting. But then you can't really explain to them how it works. You just kind of have to show them the value of buying your time back, which is what we were able to do during the pandemic.
So as you talked about earlier, the Silicon Valley has a really high cost of living, especially housing. And so some people in the area, they think, well, maybe I should buy now. They feel the pressure because they think it's always going to continue to rise, or they feel like they're priced out and they're stressed because they're never going to be able to own a property. So how would you respond to people who's really focused on that?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of funny that what you are describing right now is something that I don't think Silicon Valley has ever had reasonable housing costs. Like in the amount, like ever since I've been alive, that entire area has been the exact things that you're saying now were true 10 years ago, and they were true 10 years before that, right? It's like buy now or buy now or buy never and all that kind of stuff. It's all just a fear-based sales tactic that the real estate industry is trying to scare you into thinking if you don't give us your money now, then bad things will happen. Fear is a very good motivating factor for it. It does help if you're a salesperson to scare people. What I like to once we kind of got rid of that desire to own property, because what owning a property, like once you buy the house, your costs don't like disappear overnight after that. You're paying a mortgage for 25 years. And what people don't realize is that there are other incidental costs aside from their mortgage that you have to pay for. Things like maintenance, property taxes, real estate commissions, insurance, like, going to Home Hardware and like renovations and like this kind of stuff. When you buy a house, the costs just keep piling up and piling up. And we did this. So out of curiosity, we kind of did this analysis where we went, okay, if we had, before we retired, if we, instead of putting our money into the stock market, we put it into a house, like where would we have ended up ahead or we would end up behind? And to our surprise, we found that even though housing during that period of time that we did the study rose at about the same rate as the stock market, when stocks prices went up, our portfolio just went up at the same rate. But when housing prices went up, the additional cost of owning that house ate up all of the gains from the house's value going up. So even though somebody was making money from that house, it wasn't the owner. It was the bank. It was the government. It was Home Hardware. It was the real estate agent and this kind of stuff. So that's why they are so incentivized to keep selling people this dream of home ownership, because they make money off you, but you don't really make money yourself until you sell it. And even then, there's so many costs involved that you would have been better off just putting money into towards the portfolio. What I realized was the big difference is that owning a house does not help you retire. But being a millionaire in terms of I own $1 million house free and clear versus being a millionaire in terms of I own it in a portfolio, those are two very, very different experiences, because one, the portfolio is actually paying you, right? Like the portfolio is paying you, like for us, it was about 4%, so $40,000 a year. And that was enough for us to live on. So with a portfolio in place, and it was $1 million at the time, back in 2015, that was enough for us to retire and then travel around the world. But if you had the exact same amount of money all put into a house, you are now have to take care of that house. Like you can't quit your job, because it's like, yes, your house is paid off, but your other expenses aren't. And you have to guard the house. Like you can't just like travel for 8 months out of the year, because like something bad could happen to your house. A pipe could burst, someone could break in, a fire could start, like that kind of stuff. So it kind of traps you into one place, even if you manage to play the real estate game really, really, really well. The experience of winning, like your winning conditions, are very different, because with a house, yes, now you own your house, but now you have to take care of the house, right? It's now kind of an assignment. But if you put it towards more liquid assets that actually pay you, it then means that you can do this whole fire thing. It's actually pretty common for people in the fire community to not have a lot of their money in their house, because for exactly this reason. Even if they own a house, their house might be worth very, very little compared to California, because they realize that owning a lot of real estate, it doesn't help you retire, because you can't take a couple bricks off of your house and use that to pay for your groceries, right? Mm-hmm. But you can do that with the portfolio. So it's all part of like, what is it that like, do you want to own a home because your vision for the future is as a homeowner, or do you want to own a home simply because everyone else is owning a home and you feel left out? So you have to answer that question first, and then the question after that is, what do you want to do with your life? Like, do you want to sit around and take care of a home, or do you want to go out and travel? Do you want to go out and do whatever else that you want to do? All that's fine. Just know what you want, know what you're buying before you buy it. Because if you're just doing it because everyone else is doing it, that's not the best reason to do anything.
I think people don't understand the link between changing that money for time. Like you're buying your time back. So even if their like house appreciated significantly, you still have to at some point sell the house, get the money out, and then be able to invest that money to generate a passive income. So there's two ways to do that. Either you could build a portfolio and then have it passively give you dividends and interest, or you could buy a bunch of smaller properties and become a landlord and then get like real estate investing and get it through rental income, right? But at some point, you have to take the money that is trapped in your house and turn it into a passive stream of income. So that's the thing that people have not been thinking about. That point is just we're thinking about, okay, buy the house, that's my net worth, and then that's it. And then just go back to work. Like, how do you turn the money into buying your time back? That's the key of financial independence.
So that is a good segue into one of the questions from our audience members, which is just, can you define what you mean by financial independence? And I'd also ask if you define FIRE, because I know they're slightly different, but.
Sure. So FIRE is an acronym that I don't know who came up with it, but it stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And it basically means when you hit financial independence, that basically means that your wealth and your money is now generating enough income on its own that you don't have to do anything. And that passive income, when that equals your living expenses, you no longer need to depend on your job. You can quit, you can keep working if you want to, but you don't have to, right? You are now independent of your job in terms of needing to pay for your daily groceries and that kind of thing. Retiring early is an optional part of the FIRE journey. You can, there are lots of people that actually, the media likes to kind of focus on that retire early part. It's like, well, what if I don't want to do that? Fine, that's fine. But if you hit financial independence, that doesn't mean you have to quit your job, but it's about choice, right? When you can choose, when you are in your job by choice rather than being forced to be in it for financial reasons, that's a very, very different experience, because you can push back on your boss. You can even, you don't have to put up with the crap that everyone else has to put up with. You can say, you can be more outspoken. Like, I know people who became financially independent and they actually got better at their job because they were able to be more outspoken. They weren't as afraid of looking stupid or looking bad, or they were they were able to take more risky projects at work and actually got promoted. This is actually quite common in Silicon Valley, for example, that, I know some people who became financially independent and then were able to take on like a really big project at work that they normally wouldn't have. It would have been too risky for them. And then it went perfectly. And then they became a director, and now they have even more money, right? So that's kind of the link. That's financial independence versus retirement versus early retirement. And financial independent is more is defined as when you have again enough passive income to pay for your living expenses, but also the mathematical formula of that comes from something called the 4% rule. So this is a rule that comes from all these retirement planners that basically states that if you have a portfolio worth X, you can safely withdraw 4% of that, inflation adjusted, and it won't run out. So if you have $1 million, so if your living expenses is $40,000, if you divide that by 4%, which is the same as multiplying by 25, that tells you how much money you need in order to retire. So if your living expense was 40,000, US dollars, then that means you need $1 million to retire. If your living expense is $60,000, you need $1.5 million, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, because I think a lot of retirement articles focus on, well, you should have this much times your annual income saved, but really you should be thinking of how much are my expenses,
right?
And you just need to have 25 times your annual expenses saved up to be able to then live on the passive income.
Right. Yeah. Traditional retirement planners don't quite know what to do with us, because we are theoretically breaking all of their formulas and just what we are doing supposedly doesn't make sense according to the old classical traditional retirement formulas, which is basically all an early retirement from those guys is like freedom 55 kind of thing, right? Like that kind of thing. But the key insight of the FIRE movement is that the age at which you can retire is not based on, the point at which you can retire is not based on how old you are. It's based on how much you save. So if you make $100,000 every year, but you spend $100,000 or worse, even more than $100,000 every year, it doesn't matter how much you earn, you can never retire. But if you save 50 or 60% of your income, then it doesn't matter how old you are. When you hit your target number, and it doesn't matter how old you are, you can retire according to the math because you have enough money. So yeah, the traditional retirement planners don't quite know what to do with us. But I would like to point out that we retired back in 2015. So we left our jobs. And since then, we've had a couple financial calamities, not personally, but like in a global economic sense. There was like the oil crisis in 2015. There was,
government
a government shutdown in, I think, 2018 when Trump was in power. And then, of course, we had the pandemic now. So a couple big recessions, a very, very big stock market drops and corrections. And despite all that, we have more money now than when we retired. So our wealth has actually grown faster than we could spend it. And now we're at a point where it's almost like just the dividends coming off of the portfolio is more than we can spend and it just becomes like basically runaway infinite money over time. So it's working out great, and I realized that a lot of that those traditional retirement planners and the formulas that they use, it's just wrong.
So this question is for Kristy, because in the book you talk about a spending weakness that you had, and I know a lot of people kind of struggle with maybe one thing that they really like to spend money on. So if you want to talk us through how you handled that.
Oh yeah. So the fact that I grew up in China, and when I was little, my family actually lived on 44 cents a day at one point. Coming to Canada, like it just seemed like everything was so plentiful, and finally being able to get a job later on, it was just like, this is like an infinite amount of money. And like, I deserve it now. I should go buy fancy things. I've made it to the middle class. I should go out and prove myself, right? So at that point, I developed a addiction to Coach purses. I actually still have one of my Coach wallets that are kind of like it's an artifact from back then when I had that problem. And so I used to, whenever we went to the US, the first thing I would do is map out all the Coach factory outlets and all the Coach stores that was nearby. And then I would drag him to like every single one of them. And then as soon as they gave us like a 30% off coupon or some kind of coupon, I'm like, I can't afford not to buy this. It's like, this is entrapment. How can I not buy this? So that got a little bit crazy, and to the point where it's like, and then I started looking at Louis Vuitton purses, and I started, thinking about what other fancy things to buy, and so on and so forth. What I realized,
she was watching videos of other people unboxing Coach purses.
Yeah, like, they're called unboxing
like,
videos.
Ooh, I'm going to smell it.
Oh, look at my haul! Look at my haul!
And look at this. And I don't remember what it was called.
Yeah, I have a picture of myself grinning like a Cheshire cat with like 10 different purses on each arm, like just taking a picture like this. And so back then, I think it was because I was tying it to my identity. It's like, well, I finally made it out of poverty, so I need to treat myself and prove myself that I am actually worthy. So what I realized over time was that it was actually just basically, it was an adrenaline rush. It was just this hedonic treadmill of once you buy a purse and you're really happy, but then that happiness only lasts for about 2 weeks until you get bored of it. And you're like, oh, there's this new color and new style that's coming out. And then you buy like 10 more. And then you're like, okay, I'm still not feeling the high. And next time I need to buy more. So that's kind of like an addict when they're like, when you're addicted to cocaine, it's like that same hit to your brain, that dopamine hit that you want over and over again.
Not that we know what that's like. Just,
right.
It's not an admission of any, we hear.
Anyway, so as a result of that, I started like that was a point at which I kind of made this, like, I had this aha moment that was like, okay, so when you actually buy things, the hit only lasts a certain amount of time. And plus the fact that our tiny 1-bedroom apartment was getting more and more full of stuff to the point where it's like caving in on us. And then Bryce was like, gonna die with like a whole bunch of like suffocate under a whole bunch of Coach bags, which is probably not a good way to go. And then so at that point he convinced me, okay, you know what, we're either gonna have to spend a lot of money getting a new bigger apartment, and you're going to have to work longer hours to pay for the new rent or buy a place. We can't live like this. This is just way too much stuff that you're buying. And then at that point I realized, okay, it's like, why am I doing this? Why? Is it because it's tied to my identity? Do I actually like the purses? Does anybody even need 25 purses? So then at that point I kind of woke up from my addiction, and then realized that, okay, I'm going to spend more time on experiences, because that one doesn't clutter up our apartment, doesn't destroy the environment, and I'm actually remembering it, and instead of getting a high every 2 weeks and then needing more of a high. So that I think that is something that we've encountered from talking to other readers of ours who are saying like, oh, but my spouse is really into like fancy cars, or like my spouse is really into like, I don't know, fancy gadgets or whatever. And then it really is finding out why that they're buying it, more than trying to shame them for buying it. Because if you had just shamed me, like that wouldn't have helped at all. I would just bought more and like out of revenge. So it really is trying to help them figure out like for me, I realized it was because of this inadequacy that I was feeling from growing up poor, that I need to prove to myself that I'm actually worthy. But it is really like more of a psychological exercise in trying to figure out why you are trying to fill a void with material goods.
Exactly. I think everyone kind of has their Achilles heel to deal with. So we have a lot of great questions that people have submitted. So I figured we should maybe tackle some of these. So one of them is asking about how did you develop your portfolio and did you do your own research? And I know the book goes into more detail, like as far as tax, taking advantage of tax reduction strategies and different things. But if you wanted to kind of touch on some of the things to consider.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a big influence on us was a friend and a fellow blogger of ours named J.L. Collins, and he wrote a book called The Simple Path to Wealth. And he kind of argued about the benefit of index funds. So index funds are the kind of funds, they're called ETFs or exchange traded funds. And what they basically do is rather than buy an individual stock like Apple or Amazon or something like that, they buy a basket of all stocks in the US or in our case, Canada or Europe or like whatever. So rather than betting on an individual company, you're betting on the entire basically the entire US or the world economy. And even though one or two companies may go bankrupt unexpectedly, the entire world cannot go bankrupt, right? Because in order for the S&P 500 to go to zero, all companies inside the S&P 500 have to all go to zero. So it is, and if that happens, it probably means we're being invaded by aliens or something like that. So index funds are actually took a lot of the fear away from investing in the stock market because I didn't have the skills or the research or the resources in order to pick individual stocks and figure out how to get the right price and use options trading and derivatives and anything like that. No. All that kind of fancy, all those kinds of fancy tricks that Wall Street uses, they're not appropriate for individual investors because you just don't have the research and the tools in order to do that properly. Wall Street has, towers of people and analysts all poring over press releases and banks of high-speed computers like crunching numbers and reading the news and like making trades within milliseconds. You can't outguess Wall Street when you're doing individual stock picking. So what the strategy that we end up doing, and the one that we recommend for our readers and in the book, is index investing. So when you invest in the stock market, you invest in the entire stock market. And the stock market invariably goes up over time because as people go to work, as people make money for their company's value goes up. And the US economy and the world economy keeps making money and it keeps people employed and it keeps chugging along, making products that people want. And so once you kind of figure that out, that basic building block, then the rest becomes relatively simple. And I don't want to get into like the details of like which ETFs and how to read prospectuses and this kind of stuff. Those are the details that we go into. The exact specifics of like which symbols that we invest in, that's actually in the book. And because I don't have my charts and graphs here with me. So if you want to go into specific details and if you want to build a portfolio that basically mirrors what we are currently personally invested in, go grab the book and just copy our moves. Because the great thing about index investing is that our success does not require somebody else to fail, right? It's not a zero-sum game. If you just copy us, we'll all make money, right? We're not trying to like sell something to you. We're not trying to trick anybody and then trying to make money from commissions or anything like that. If you simply buy the same things that we're buying, we're going to make money, you're going to make money, and then one day we're going to meet and high five somewhere in Portugal or something.
I just want to add the fact that banks hate it when you ask for index funds, which is a big sign that they don't want you to have that secret, because a lot of the times they're like, oh, no, we're going to put together a managed portfolio and we're going to charge you 2 to 4% because we're going to pick the best stocks. And it's not, because we've actually done analysis comparing our portfolio, the passive index portfolio, with their active funds, and it's actually lagging. Like ours is much better and has lower fees. But then when we, like in the beginning, when we were learning about all this stuff and we tried to actually buy index funds, we walked into a bank and asked, the nice lady at the bank, they did not want to give it to us. They just kept trying to sell us constantly on, oh, you need active managed portfolio. You need to do this, you need to do that. And then it made me question. I'm like, okay, so if you're building your clients an active managed portfolio, why are you the one that's driving the Lamborghini and none of your clients are driving that Lamborghinis? Like, who is actually making money? So very, very suspicious that they did not want to give that to us. We actually had to jump through a lot of hoops to buy index funds. Now it's like much, much easier. That was many years ago. But now the fact that it's open to the public, the fact that you can easily build a passive index, like diversified portfolio yourself, that's the game changer. That's a game changer. And financial advisors hate this. They absolutely hate the FIRE community because a lot of us just like talk about all the stuff for free. We just write it in books, we put it on the blog, and they hate us because we're taking away, their reason to exist, basically.
Yeah, we don't need them. And it kind of gave me some trust issues of anybody in the financial industry and real estate industry, that they may not have your best interest at heart, right? Like now instinctively, when someone's wearing like a nice, like finely cut Italian suit and his hair's all slicked back, I'm like, you're probably, before you even say anything, you're probably full of crap.
So a lot of our viewers, they're very interested in how you managed to retire early with healthcare, because in the United States, of course, it's like there's no national health service, right? So, and maybe you can talk about when you travel, how you deal with healthcare, and then how someone in the United States who is living on their retirement income would be able to deal with that.
Yeah, a lot of people, once again, when you live in California, when you live in the States, you don't actually realize that the rest of the world don't really worry about healthcare, and healthcare is not that expensive once you leave the States. So when we actually left Canada, we lost our, gold-plated socialized healthcare, and we had to purchase expat insurance while we were traveling for the 5 to 6 years. And it's actually not as expensive as people thought. People think it is. I think how much did we spend on healthcare? Like maybe like $1,000 a year. And if you were to include the US, it's like $2,000 a year for the two of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in addition to that, if you go to Europe and when you're buying medication, so for example, he had this really bad rash when we were in Malta in Europe, and we went to see a doctor. And just going, like that whole experience was like, okay, are you from the EU? Okay, do you have an EU passport? No. Can I see your Canadian passport? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So the doctor sees us, prescribes it, and we go to pay, and they're like, don't worry about it. We're like, really? They're like, no, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Because it's so cheap.
Okay.
It's so cheap. Here's an example. Okay, so here's an example of what U.S. healthcare looks like to the rest of the world. When you buy an international, so it's called expat insurance. It's for people that move to a new country and are not eligible for whatever that country's insurance system is. So you have to pay everything out of pocket and that kind of stuff. If you step foot inside the U.S. at any point during that coverage period, your premiums like double or triple, right? And some insurance policies, I Am Global is the company that we use. They actually have riders inside their inside the document that says, if you seek, here's the price for everyone else. Here's the price US specifically. If you get sick in the US and you manage to seek treatment in literally any other country, like hobble over to Canada, hobble over to Mexico, and then if you can get treatment there, we will waive your deductible and we will pay you the fee to like fly there, something like that, right? So it's like they really don't, like, as long as you're outside the US, healthcare is just a non-issue. And even in the US, now that the Affordable Care Act has been for not for lack of trying, the Republicans were not able to destroy it. Remember that the Obamacare has federal and state subsidies when based on your income level. So if you were to leave your job and if you were to stop making a salaried income, your taxable income would drop, and then you'd be eligible for federal subsidies that then pays for a significant portion of your healthcare. And if you wanted to live in the states that actually took the Medicaid expansion, that like fills in the gap between what Medicaid is able to pay for and what the ACA subsidies pay for, then all of a sudden healthcare becomes heavily subsidized by the government and not nearly that big of a deal anymore. So if you're willing to move outside of the US or spend a significant portion of the year outside the US, healthcare becomes basically a non-issue in terms of cost. And if you had to stay inside the US for whatever reason, once you leave your job, Obamacare takes care of you basically.
So another question that we have here in regard to your travel is about challenges with visas, because some countries limit how long you can stay. So how do you?
Yeah. So one of the first places we went to was Europe. In the very beginning, we were actually afraid of traveling outside of places that spoke English because we're like, oh no, it actually turned out not to be a problem at all. So in Europe, they have the Schengen zone where you can actually stay on like a visitor's visa for 90 days. So we actually scheduled our travel so that we would be hopping between Europe and Asia. So we actually stayed 3 months and like visiting multiple European countries. And then we went to Asia, and then we went to Malaysia first. And I think Malaysia also has something similar where it's like 90 days. And then from there, we went to Thailand. So 90 days is actually quite like a key number that we use in order to decide our time of travel. And then within Asia, there's also exceptions. So for example, for Cambodia and for Vietnam, you have to apply for a visa before you go into the country. So we did that while we were in Thailand. So it does require a bit of planning to figure out the visa. But even if we were to stay long-term, Thailand has something called the Elite Visitors Visa, in which you can actually, like, you pay a certain amount of money and you can actually stay in Thailand for 5 years. Or for people who actually have children, they do something called world schooling. That's another conversation separately, where we met these people who actually traveled the world with their children. And when they put their kids in school, international schools in Thailand, that also gives them the right to a visa to stay in Thailand, an educational visa. So there's many different flavors depending on how long you're going to stay and which country you're going to go to. So definitely in terms of visas, it's like basically just a learning process. Like once you figure out how many days you can stay with the visitor's visa, you can hop between Europe and Asia. And if you want to stay in Asia long term, there's different types of educational visa or wealth visa that you can use.
Yeah, if you're going to be fully nomadic like us, meaning you switch country every month or every couple months, basically just stick with tourist visas, and then you don't have to deal with immigration generally ever. If you wanted to do like a home base type thing, like you move to Portugal, you move to Europe, you move somewhere, and then you buy a property there, that does require some more effort because there's immigration lawyers involved and this kind of stuff. But for generally, if you don't need to take a job in that country and you already have, like you're basically financially self-sufficient, for having you inside that country just means you're going to come in and you're just going to spend money, right? You're just going to go in there and you're going to stimulate the local economy. So you're like a little stimulus package or whatever. So generally governments are totally okay with that, because you're not taking a job away from a local. You're just going in there and spending money and buying tapas. So they're cool with that. So there's lots of different options for that kind of visa. And we write about some specific ones in the book, but things change all the time. But yeah, generally that's not that big of an issue. We know some people who have gone that visa route. We obviously we do the hop around on tourist visas route, but and there's some people that spend most of their time in their home country and then venture outside and or retire inside the home country, in which case visas aren't a problem at all. But whatever the type of travel that you want to do post-retirement, it actually becomes not that big of a deal. It's not nearly as difficult as the U.S. immigration process, but that's not really saying much because nothing's as difficult as the U.S. immigration process.
So thank you so much for coming. We do have some more questions, but I think we'll just kind of wrap up with one where they're asking kind of, a lot of people identify themselves with their career or profession, and that's part of the reason that they're not retiring. So maybe you can talk about kind of, since you've retired, what you have been able to explore and maybe what your next steps are.
Oh, absolutely. So when I was a child, I wanted to be a writer. But because of, my growing up in poverty and my dad needing to support my family back home, there was no way I could actually pick a risky career in which I would need support from him. I just wouldn't be able to have that. So as a result, I chose a career that was more based on like strategic planning and based on finances rather than based on passion. And even then, I thought quitting my hateful job that I did not tie my identity to as an engineer would be easy. And it was still insanely hard. I had a mini heart attack mini panic attack when I handed in my notice at work. There was none of that like tap dancing your way out of the office or patting your boss's head like a bongo drum, like I imagined. It was just panic. So I can completely understand where people are coming from when they're saying like, I've done this job for the last 10 years. It's part of my identity. How do I retire? Like, what am I going to do with myself? Who am I? Like, who am I anymore? So people are afraid of having some sort of identity crisis. So two things. So number one, when we said financial independence, retire early, the retire early part is actually optional. So you don't actually have to retire. If you actually like your job, you just keep working at your job. Like the fact that you have financial you're financially independent and you have financial security, means that even if that job goes away, you're going to be okay. So you can continue working. Another thing you can do is go down to part-time. So maybe you love your job, but you don't have enough time to spend with family. You don't have enough time to spend taking care of your pets or your friends or your kids. That is completely an option too. And for people who want to change their identity, I would advise from my own experience not to just like go cold turkey and be like, okay, I'm just going to switch this new thing and see what happens. Everything is not black and white. I think we've been trained to think this way in school and also as part of the like regular jobs, that it's like, I'm either this identity or I'm nothing. Like, why can't you be in between? You can be a whole bunch of things. You can, glide your way towards a new identity rather than just cutting it off cold turkey and then becoming something else. So one of the things that we did to bridge ourselves into our new identity after we quit was that I did some volunteering as like doing tech administration for a nonprofit. So I was able to leverage some of the skills I already had from 10 years of engineering doing that. And a lot of these people were actually writers. So they became my writer friends and like a new group, a new community that I discovered while bridging it with my existing skills. And I think in your case, you actually liked your identity. So you didn't need to change it at all, right? You actually enjoyed being a developer.
I was actually still doing software development for quite some time before I realized I enjoyed writing as well. And to her point about that, you don't need to retire early. I know like one of my directors at my old company he didn't actually call it fire, but basically he cashed out a bunch of stock options and became filthy rich, which is nice too. And he decided that he took some time off of work, and then eventually he said, you know what, I miss it. So he went to go work for Google. I'm like, okay, that's a retirement plan that I wouldn't have guessed. And now he's working on IoT stuff and making all the thermostats talk like internet enabled or like whatever. So, I mean, like, you don't have to give up your identity. You can, like, if anything, you can double down on your current identity if you really wanted to. But FIRE, so what I like to tell people is FIRE doesn't solve your identity problems or solve it doesn't necessarily make you like happy on cloud nine, like all the time. But what it does do is it gives you the time and the space to figure out what you want your identity to be. Because for a lot of the times, like, we think that our identity is our job, but a lot of us kind of went into our jobs because we needed the money, right? If you took away that constraint, that, for example, especially for California, Santa Clara, a lot of engineers and a lot of like computer people work in that industry. Is that your identity? Like, would that still be your identity if it didn't pay anything? And if the answer is yes, great, then you're exactly where you need to be. But if you ever had I've always wanted to be a cowboy or like whatever. Now, like, once you hit financial independence, that's the time that you can actually pursue that and see if that's what would actually make you happy, and you can do it guilt-free because you don't need to. You don't need it you don't need it to pay you, right?
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And for those of you in the audience who had other questions, things about like, what do you do about when you have children? Is it more difficult, or what exactly was the portfolio? I highly recommend that you check out or buy Quit Like a Millionaire by Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung. And thank you so much for being here. And we really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.